Good morning. You're on with Ron and Romane, Reason for Reason. And when I say good morning, well, this is the first time we had the chance to say that. We are joining us at our new hour, Saturdays from 9 to 10. So, Romane, what do you think? How's it feel to be Saturday morning?
In spite of me being a morning person, this is going to take some adjusting on Saturday.
You can say that again.
It is.
Yeah.
But we are going to rerun on Tuesday night, right? So is that what we said, Terry?
Yes.
So everybody should know that. If you don't catch us live on Saturday morning, then you can catch the rerun on Tuesdays, same bat time.
6 to 7.
Yes.
So today we're going to talk about this us versus them thing. You know, some people call it the battle of the sexes. Is it supposed to be a battle?
No.
Right. And, you know, if it is this so-called battle, what's the origin of this battle? I mean, why? Why is it necessary?
Why is it necessary?
Yeah.
You really want to know?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, this is your area of expertise. So, yeah. So,
it's definitely not my area, but we'll explore. I think that this is another way for them to try to keep men in a position of power and keep them as the top earners and stuff like that. That's what I believe.
well, I've always wanted to ask a woman this question. When you say men, what men?
Do we really want to know that too?
Well, yeah, because you know something, historically in this country, Black men have not been in quote unquote positions of power where we are the ones who are making decisions that affect the lives of others. You know, I mean, I'm talking about masses of people. We're not writing the legislation. You know, we're not the lawmakers per se who are saying, well, abortion is illegal. That's really not us. We're not the ones who are saying women shouldn't be paid equally. It's not necessarily us. So when you say men, what men are you referring to?
Caucasian men?
Okay, now, right. And realistically, even with them, it's kind of a select group, right? Because when this country was founded, in order to even vote, you had to be white, a landowner, and I think you had to be white and a landowner, right? Of course, no women were allowed to vote, and they kept power kind of consolidated amongst just a small group. And to this day, it's pretty much the same thing, right? The same people get elected to office over and over and over. And, you know, I was watching a documentary on Shirley Chisholm. So she ran for president in 1972. So we're talking 50 years ago. And the same platform that she put forward in 1972 is the same stuff we're arguing for today, 50 years later. So how much has changed?
Not much at all.
It seems like the more things change, the more things stay the same. You know, I mean, things have improved for women in some respects. You know, during that time, the 70s, well, late 60s, early 70s, you know, you had the women's movement firing up. Because, of course, unequal pay, the treatment, I mean, there was really no protection against things like sexual harassment. I mean, as a waitress or stewardess and some of these other job titles, you could expect to be, you know, manhandled, right? And there was you really had nothing you could do about it. Years ago, if a husband or a boyfriend beat up his wife, cop would say, hey, go take a walk and cool off. Well, what if he doesn't cool off and he comes back and he's still angry? You know, so many women lost their lives because, you know, just go take a walk and calm down. So this whole bad letter sexist thing, I think it is a tool of division, just like so many other tools of division that are used. We always talk about race, we talk about class, we talk about sex. There's always these divisions that are created. And realistically, they're artificial, aren't they?
They are artificial. And I was reading a study this morning before we came in, and it talked about, it was a psychological study. As a matter of fact, there have been many that were real clear that the findings show that there's really no difference in between men and women when it comes to personality, cognition, or leadership, which to me kind of sums everything up real tight and puts it real in a nice little box. Because if you put personalities, cognitive ability, and leadership skills together, those are really the defining factors in how far we can go. Right. So with that being said, these studies show that there really no difference. But I guess the thing that we have to look at is why, even though they have studies that show things like this, why are women still battling to be taken out of this image of barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen? Because as much as we want to think in 2022 that people don't think like that anymore, there are a lot of men and men of color that are still saying that they're looking for these submissive women, and they're going outside of our race because they're looking for submission. So it's a lot to look at.
I think a lot of the problems the root is in religion, right? Because in religion, women are pretty much non-existent. And I don't care what religion, of the major religions, women are pretty much non-existent. And if you are Jewish, if you read the Torah, which is the Old Testament, when the story of the Jews fleeing Egypt, they counted the men only. If you go to a temple, typically the men are downstairs on the main floor, the women are upstairs. So I guess we're creating this perception that God is a sexist, that God is racist. And I think it only happens primarily in this country. In this country, if you ask a Caucasian what they are, they'll just say, well, I'm white. Well, okay, but we're identified as African American. People from Spanish-speaking countries are considered Hispanic. So everybody has a region where they can say is their origin or their point of origin. But what does it mean when you just say you're white? So there's no point of origin in where you're from. If you go over to other places like Europe, people say, well, I'm Italian, I'm French, I'm German. They don't say, well, I'm white. They'll identify themselves by their national origin, but not here. And, we've always, when you talk about psychological studies, I was looking at something it was on Facebook the other day, and they were talking about how years ago, these pseudoscientists would do like studies of the shape and size of the head to determine, of course, white superiority. Well, if your head is shaped like this, right? If it's elongated, well, obviously you have a larger brain and more brain capacity. Now, of course, what they did was they described a European head, right? And I guess it's the same thing, this competition, or rather this division with men and women. And, throughout all religions, and I was talking to somebody the other day who's Muslim, and she was saying how in Islam, women are expected to be submissive. Judaism, same thing. Christianity, I remember back in the day going to church, you rarely saw a woman in the pulpit. And, what's, I guess, a real impediment for women is other women agree with that. When Shirley Chisholm was running for office, there were a lot of women that said, I'll never vote for a female president. Said the same thing about Hillary Clinton.
I think that it's an isolated group of women that would say that they wouldn't vote for a female president. And I think that those are the women who have kind of been brainwashed to believe the nonsense
Mhm.
that they spew and publicize about why women can't be in these leadership positions, that whole irrational piece that they use as a reason why women can't lead in positions like the presidency and stuff
Mhm.
like that. They say women are too irrational, when my outlook has always been a woman would be a better leader as a president, because a woman would think about the consequences and the repercussions of everything that they do, and how it would affect their family units, their children, their children's children. Men don't really think about that. Men are pretty cut and dry.
Now, I don't know. I would hope that as president, before you make a major decision, that you would sit down and reflect on the possible consequences. Before you send somebody's sons and daughters off to war, let's hope that there is a legitimate reason to do so. Not just for corporate America to keep their stock prices high, but a real legitimate threat to this country. And when I say a threat, I mean somebody is actually coming to attack this country, and not, well, we think there's weapons of mass destruction. So I would hope that, male or female, that they would take into account, totality of circumstances.
We would hope,
Right.
but we had Trump in office.
Okay, now that's a whole that's a whole nother lecture right there. A whole nother show.
So, kind of, that kind of just annihilated our hope. All the hope was just
Right.
gone at that point.
But you said something interesting. You said irrational. I was watching a show, and I guess this is in like the 19th century, and they were saying for women who suffered from postpartum depression, they thought it was a mental disease,
Mm-hmm.
a mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And these women were sometimes locked away.
Mm-hmm.
Your husband would have you committed to a psych ward simply because you were suffering from postpartum depression. They didn't understand the diagnosis.
But don't you agree that that's kind of what we do when we don't understand things? When we don't understand things, we put a negative spin on it, or this negative connotation on it. When we don't understand other cultures, we make their culture and what they do in their culture bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what we do in our society. Things that we don't understand, instead of digging or probing to try to get information to understand,
Mm-hmm.
when we don't understand, that's a reason for us to reject it.
Okay, but this is your wife, the mother of your children, right? And because after birth, hormonally, things have undergone a major change, you're going to lock her away. And these women some of them will be committed for the rest of their lives.
Well, because they didn't understand what was going on. And a good example of that is, women have been having babies for forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, I sent my daughter-in-law, soon to be mommy, something I saw on Facebook with all these photos of men in the labor room,
Mm-hmm.
in the labor and delivery room. Some were passed out. Some's eyes looked like they were popping out of their head. And just think about it. They've heard stories about women giving birth for forever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a difference between hearing the stories and living the moment
Mm-hmm.
in the labor and delivery room and really seeing what the heck goes on in there, right?
Right.
They all look traumatized. Some
Mhm.
passed out, but everybody looked traumatized. So I would imagine you have this wonderful, sweet, submissive wife, right? And she was beautiful. You married her, picture perfect relationship. She gives birth. She spirals into depression. She's unhappy. She's not sleeping. She's not eating properly, because all those things also play into
Mhm.
the depression, right? So she's got all these things going on, and the husband, he probably can't see outside of the fact that what the hell is going on?
Right.
What's going on with my wife?
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine, I mean, having her committed forever is a bit extreme. Um, Wanting her to go sit down and see somebody and the husband really not understanding what's going on, I could kind of see that.
Well, that was in the 19th century, and I guess um, psychology and psychiatry were in, I guess, its early stages.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of stuff people simply committed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, stuff that today you simply go and you talk to a social worker,
Therapist.
counselor, somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and you're fine. But
Mm-hmm.
during that time, anything that deviated from the norm, you were gone. You were locked up.
Mm-hmm.
But when you said about men passing out and having these reactions to seeing a child born or their child born, they weren't committed.
No, but that's momentary. That's just for a moment,
Mm-hmm.
for the mother, because guess what's happening at this point? The house probably stopped running at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Because the men didn't take a big part in the cooking and the cleaning and stuff like that. So now if
Not
the wife,
necessarily.
well, no, I'm saying let's imagine that was the case in the time and season
Okay, yeah.
that we're talking about.
Mhm.
Men are much more involved now.
Mhm.
But let's just imagine in the time and season that we're talking about that men were less involved domestically,
Mhm.
right? And now the house stops running. Some of that call for psychiatric care is probably some desperation too,
Mhm.
to try to just gain back some homeostasis in the household, right? Not saying it was right, I mean, but just trying to look at it logically and say, what could have caused them to react like that to women that they say that they loved, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know. I think it was desperation.
Well, that and the fact that once this woman is committed, I can go find another wife now.
Oh my goodness, you think so, Ron?
Well, that's what they did.
That's horrible.
You have to figure this woman is going to be committed for the remainder of her life. In many instances, so I'm going to find me another wife. I'm not
But
going to.
what about the ones that weren't
The ones
committed
that-
forever?
But they were stigmatized. You know what I mean?
Okay,
And
but they came home
yeah,
back to their husband.
maybe. You gotta think that up until probably maybe the 80s, divorce favored men, and in some religions it still does. In some religions, and I think in Orthodox Islam, only the man can ask for divorce. The woman doesn't have a right to do that.
Hasidic Jews also.
Right? The man can ask for a divorce on certain grounds. Women have no voice really.
So would it be fair to say that it's not really religion that perpetuates this unequal position
Mhm.
between men and women? Is it religion or just the people um, who continue to practice this doctrine, this man-made doctrine, instead of looking at it and saying, that was then and this is now, and there's some things that need to be tweaked. I know we don't like to always do that as Christians,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that we need to reevaluate the blueprint
Mm-hmm.
and say maybe there's some changes to the structure
Mm-hmm.
based on, again, the times and seasons, right?
Right.
Maybe that's what it is.
Well, you know something? They say that whoever wins the war writes the stories, right? So it's their story that's told. So for men wrote the Bible, wrote the Quran, right? So of course they wrote it from a perspective that's going to put them in a position of power. Women were an afterthought. And it goes back to this whole idea that, well, Adam came first and then Eve came second. So Eve is already in a lesser position from day one, right? Created from a rib. And then, of course, Eve is the one who they say committed the original sin, right? But while both of them were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, it was Eve who suffered the worst punishment. So for somebody like Adam, Eve comes to you. Now you've been in there, you've been in the garden before her. You understand the rules. I mean, you are talking to God face to face, right? And God says you will avoid this tree. Anything else is good, but this tree you need to avoid. So when she comes to you with this alleged fruit, you mean you can't just say no? You can't just say, Eve, look, I'm not eating that. You shouldn't have been eating it either. You know what I mean? Like, I love you, but I ain't going down with you. I mean, like, you and that snake you was with, y'all go back over to y'all finish that fruit. But as for me, I'm not messing with that.
I think that there are many women in the pulpit now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just start with saying that. There are many women in the pulpit. Some people in the church will probably get mad at me. It's okay. I'm used to it. They get mad at me all the time. But I think that with the number of women that we have in the pulpit now, we should be practicing the ability to be free and independent thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
And there are enough of us in the pulpit now where some of those changes could take place. We just have to get to a place where we convince the women that it's okay to do that and not, not have these cookie cutter situations where they're expecting everything to just be identical and look the way it did, thousands of years ago. That's like the lady that I told you, somebody came on the Real Romanate page and she said, no, you don't ask questions about anything with God.
Mm-hmm.
It's just either you believe it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I challenged her and said, well, the Bible says we perish from lack of knowledge. So how do you gain knowledge?
Mm-hmm.
You gain knowledge by asking questions. Right?
Absolutely.
So we have to get to a place where we know that it's okay to ask questions. We know that it's okay to look at things and say, let's take this apart precept by precept, not just look at something. You ever see people take one scripture, they take one scripture out the Bible, one verse, and they read it, and they give you a whole story on one scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And then my question is, did you read the verse before? Or how about 2 or 3 verses before and
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 verses after, right?
Right.
So that, and then when you do that, guess what happens? You find out that maybe that's not what they were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The very thing that you thought surmised the whole book, you surmised into one verse, right?
Mm-hmm.
You find out when you go precept by precept that that's not what they meant. So we just have to get to a place where we can identify that it's okay to ask questions, that it's okay to look at things and know that things were designed based on, like you and I discussed before, a patriarchal system,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we have to stay cognizant of times and seasons, because the Bible even says, to everything there is a season purposed under the heavens,
Mm-hmm.
right? So everything is about times and seasons. We can't just say, no, this happened then and this is what has to happen now. And here's the proof. And I say this to people in the church. The devil and his imps that they fought in 1920 are not the same imps that he sends out in 2022, right? Because it's a different game now.
Mm-hmm.
So the things that we were up against then, we got a whole new set of things that we're up against now.
Mm-hmm.
So if we try to use those same tactics that we used then against what we see now, we're going to lose.
Right. You know what I think? We are, even though there's women in the pulpit, they're teaching the same doctrine,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, and I'm talking specifically about the Black church, we are teaching the same doctrine that was taught to us on the plantation.
Mm-hmm.
The same doctrine, the same religiosity, the same actions that the slave master told us would give us freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and introducing us to God. is the same stuff we're teaching in the churches all these centuries later. So not a lot has changed. So what you have is you have women in the pulpit, women in positions of authority, but still imposing the same rules and regulations and customs and mores that the men did. You know, I mean, now, of course, you see a whole different, I guess there's a different mentality in church nowadays because, you know, I've gone to, you know, weddings and funerals and things of that nature. And I see women coming in there with basically a miniskirt on. Well, you'd be lucky to call it a miniskirt. You know, back in the day, mother so-and-so will stop you at the door like, sweetheart, come here, sweetheart. Let me talk to you. You know, take you into one of these rooms, right? Put a robe on you.
A sheet.
Or something. You go sit there with this robe on like you in the choir. Don't sing nothing, but just sit there, right? Because there was, I guess, the idea of modesty, you know, was supposed to be how women practice, right? There was really, and to this day, there's still no real, I guess, regulation on how a man is supposed to dress.
There isn't. And so what happens is, and I know this firsthand, that's nice if they take them in the room and put a robe on them. I come from a church where you walked in like that. They had sheets on deck, right? And safety pins, boxes of safety pins. They would wrap you from the waist down in a minute and pin you, and you needed to go sit down. And all of that was because, and people get mad, but let's tell the truth, right? All of that was really about, we don't want you to sit in the pew and to tempt the man that's on the pulpit, right? Or other
probably
men in the
any
church.
other men.
Yeah, or that's what I said, or any other men in the church. But specifically, don't entice the man or the man of God, right? But we never talked about why the man of God would be looking and feeling lustful about the women in the church. And many of them who, you know, what do they say? The church is an emergency room. People come into church, they're broken. So you know these women, a lot of them, I'm not going to say all of them, a lot of them come into the church and they're broken, right? They're coming to the emergency room. They're looking to find something to heal, right? And you looking at them with lustful eyes. We didn't address that, but we addressed the women not tempting the men. So again, and you said something that was very important, that the women on the pulpit are teaching the same doctrine. And that's the part that they haven't grabbed a hold of yet, is that it's man-made doctrine.
Right.
So the same way you and I are sitting here, and no pun intended to the Kojic church, but the Kojic church, they sit down and they came up with their own set of rules, right? Women can't wear pants. Women can't wear, if you wear lipstick, it can't be red lipstick. They came up with all these different rules, right? And those are just man-made rules. So you have to say to yourself, is that God? Or was this just, you know, some people that sat down? Did Ron and Romane sit down and come up with all of this? Did Romane say no pants because she just thinks women should wear skirts? Did Ron say no red lipstick because he prefers earth tones? You know, like, what was the premise behind all the rules? And so, again, women in the pulpit are teaching the same doctrine because nobody has reached a place yet where they feel comfortable enough to know that there's a difference between challenging God and challenging man, right? And the doctrine is just challenging man. It's not challenging God.
Right.
Because God is really going to be okay with you asking him questions. God is going to be okay with that. It's the man, it's the flesh and blood that's not okay.
That doesn't want to be challenged.
That's not okay with you asking questions. So we have to get to that place of comfortability and just knowing that it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to know that things change. And then how about this? And I've taught this from the pulpit. Faith is lawless, right? So it's absolutely lawless. So if you believe that red lipstick is a sin, for you, red lipstick is a sin, right? Because God can't move outside of what you believe, right? And if you believe wearing pants is a sin, then wearing pants is a sin. If you believe that whatever you put on is okay because God is not concerned, then whatever you put on is okay. God is not concerned. And so we have to get to that point where we just stop putting God in this little box, because then what happens is you get a whole bunch of people who say, I don't want to come to church anymore. And it's not because of God, it's because of what you said earlier, religiosity. And religiosity is exactly, it does exactly what it was intended to do, which was to keep people bound, right?
Well, I'll tell you something. I found that religion and God are completely separate, right?
There is. Me shout on that one.
Well, the way I look at it, right? God gives us a simple set of rules to live by, but man comes in and says, "Well, I think you should do this. I think you should dress like that. I think." In some countries like Saudi Arabia, women just were allowed to drive like 2-3 years ago. What does it have to do with religion? What does it have to do with God? Nothing. But I have a question for you that I've been curious about. As a Black woman, do you think that your daily struggle is not just against the system, the oppressive system, but is it also against Black men at times? Okay. So you think that Black women are under much more pressure than other women?
I think that we're under a tremendous amount of pressure. I think in a lot of instances, we've been forced by default to be the sole providers. I didn't say every Black woman, so let me make sure I clarify, right? But in a lot of instances, we are forced to do that by default. I think that that's been perpetuated for so many generations, right? That it has produced such strong Black women, right? And then here's the piece that always throws me for a loop. Society and Black men have helped to cultivate very strong Black women. But now these very strong Black women that you guys have cultivated are exactly what you're running away from. And you run into other races of women. Specifically, I've heard Black men say Hispanic and Asian women. They like the most because they seem to be the most submissive, right? So my whole thing would be, in addition to everything else that we're subjected to in the workplace, right? And I'm a Black woman, degreed woman in the workplace, managing employees. Every day is a battle. Every day that I go into the office, it's a battle. I'm managing Caucasian people every day. For me to say the bathroom is over there, they want to tell me, no, the bathroom is in the opposite direction, just because it's me telling them that.
Right.
So every day it's a battle in the workplace. Then I come home and I'm forced by default to be the sole provider, right? Then I'm taking care of everything domestic. And then on top of that, when I'm assertive and strong, because for lack of a better term, I've been forced to be a boss, right? Now, my Black king is telling me, no, you're too strong. I need you to be more submissive. I need you to just acquiesce when I say something, whether you agree with it or not. So if that's not an attack, Ron, I don't know what it is.
Well, we talked about this before, and a lot of our habits, and I'm talking specifically about, African Americans, a lot of our habits come from our experiences on the plantation, from segregation, from Jim Crow. In our history, and I'm talking our history outside of America, in Africa and other places, we had no problem with a woman being on the throne. You know, probably the most advanced civilization ever was what's called Egypt. So in order to ascend the throne in Egypt, do you know how you got there?
Mm.
It wasn't through your father's line, it was through your mother's line. So when you went, and there would be a procession, right? When you would go to sit on the throne, one thing that was in your procession was your placenta to prove who your mother is. Don't matter who your daddy is, who's your mother? Because the line was through the mother.
Mm-hmm.
It was a matrilineal system.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have a problem with that. We accepted that. In the African, spiritual system, there was no separation in time. The belief was that man and woman were created as one together. So that break came in much later.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was when people came to Africa with the Bible.
Mm.
And, you know, there's an African saying that the European came to Africa, he came with the Bible. He told us to close our eyes and pray. We had the land, he had the Bible. When we opened our eyes, he had the land and we had the Bible. And here we are, centuries later, we still have the Bible. We're still not in control of the land.
Mm-hmm.
We're holding on to this belief, right, that, okay, I'm in a miserable state right now. But if I hold on to this word, this belief, well, one day I will ascend to heaven and it'll all be worthwhile in the end. But what about right now? And, you know, this doctrine was created to keep us on the plantation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can take a person out of jail, you know, take them out of a penal institution or penitentiary and put them back in society. But if the bars are still there, you know, mentally,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, psychologically,
Mm-hmm.
well, you're still an inmate. And that's what religion has made of people. It made us religious inmates, right? You know, we go to church and we think, well, okay, I'm going there to get free. No, you're not. Mm-mm. The Bible says, know the truth and the truth shall make you free. Problem is, we don't know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So you go there and you're fed this doctrine, and what seems to be most important to you, and I'm not saying this about all churches, and I don't really want to, you know, go off on a tangent on church, but you find people seem to be more interested in how they look going through the door than the lessons they'll receive. You know what I mean?
I think you're right. And I think the reason that happens is because people go into church and people are focused on the religion and not the relationship. Because when you have a relationship, right, the relationship is you and him. Mm-hmm. That's the relationship, right?
Now,
and so no, and
you said him. Now, how do we know God is him?
Who and that's where I don't limit people, mm-hmm. right? Whatever you believe, whatever your higher power is, mm-hmm. and I'm real careful that I always say that to people, whoever you believe your higher power is, because in the Bible it talks about the 12 tribes, right? Mm-hmm. And I believe the 12 tribes are just all of us who believe something different anyway. Mm-hmm. And the church, some people in the church would say, you know, Pastor, how could you say that? How could you say that openly and you're a pastor? Because I'm in relationship with God. Mm-hmm. I'm not in religion, I'm in relationship. And anything that doesn't bear witness to my spirit that was put on the inside of me, because mm-hmm. my spirit can tell me yay or nay. Right. So if my spirit says nay, I don't care what you say. My spirit says nay. So with that being said, people have to go into church and they have to focus on relationship and not religion. Because what will happen is if you start to really focus on relationship, when you hear something, you'll be like Romane. I hear it. And from the moment that I hear it, if it's off, I hear something internally that just kind of goes, eh. Mm-hmm. Like, no, I don't receive it. And my mom laughs because I'm so confident in that some people might see it as cocky. I will tell you, I don't receive that. I don't receive that. I rebuke that, whatever. However you want me to say it to you so you get it clearly. I don't receive it. I don't have a problem saying don't put your hands on me. I don't have a problem with any of that because my primary focus is not man. My primary focus is relationship. My primary focus is not doctrine. My primary focus is, again, relationship. And so that's why they still teaching this doctrine because they haven't gotten to that place yet. When you're in relationship, you discover that it's okay to ask questions. When you're in relationship, you discover that it's okay for you to look and see that men wore robes in the New Testament too. Men wore robes. Men don't wear robes now, right? It's okay to. I'll give you another example. I do not like to get on the pulpit in a robe.
Right.
A robe is not who Roman A is, right? And if a robe is a prerequisite of me getting on the pulpit at your church, then I'm not getting on the pulpit at your church, right? Because that's not who I am. And I don't think that's important. I don't think the robe is important. So, and again, because that's doctrine. So we got to get to a place where we're okay to challenge the doctrine. And I think you're right. I think religion has taken a major front seat, if not the driver's seat, in steering how we see men versus women. And they've helped to perpetuate this thing where it's them versus us when it really should be us.
Right. Well, one of the things we need to challenge is a lot of people don't question how do we know God is male? Because if you think about it, they tell you, well, God is a spirit, right? Spirits are neither male nor female, correct? Then they tell you, well, God is a man. Well, which one is it? His only begotten son. Well, how you begetting a son if you ain't got a woman? So, there are just so many unanswered questions there, things that just don't add up to me. Others, a little different, right? But, how do we know for certain that the higher power is a male? We just take it for granted. We don't question it.
I think because we continue to live in a system that's designed to put men in a position of power. I don't even think that is something that is necessarily taught as opposed to something that we just instinctively say. Right? So, and I'll just tell you my position. My position is that it really doesn't matter to me, right? It doesn't matter. Probably instinctively, I say he, but it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that it is who it is.
But now let me ask you a question. If you would go onto somebody's pulpit and refer to God as she, what do you think would happen?
Oh, they would be angry with me.
Angry with you? It would drag you up the pulpit.
But again, I don't get upset behind that because God takes each of us from glory to glory, right? So maybe I'm here and you here right now. My prayer is that you just come up. You know what I mean? So no judgment. I'm gonna still be who I am, and my belief system is still going to be what it is, right? And that goes for anybody. That goes for you or anybody else. I'm going to believe what I believe anyway. And you and nobody else gets to dictate or infiltrate my belief system, right? Because I'm in relationship. I'm not into doctrine. And I'm one of those people where I'm really, the religiosity thing, I don't do it. Can't do it.
Right.
But that same rule applies to my neighbor. You don't get to infiltrate my belief system. And I'll have enough respect not to impose my belief system on you. I may mention it because maybe I want to introduce you to it. But if you don't receive it, I'm not badgering you. I'm not doing any of those things because everybody has a right to practice autonomy. And I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to walk around fire and brimstone. That's not my role.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I just think that the whole concept of God being male is something that we need to explore and need to challenge, because it all feeds into this whole concept of male supremacy.
well, you know what I think? I think Ron really wants to just challenge the whole organized religion, the whole concept of organized religion.
Well, that's true.
And I know.
That's true.
So I don't really think it's just that. I think it's the whole concept of organized religion. And there's so many things that you say that I absolutely agree with. And then there are other things where, for lack of a better term, you know that expression, I shall not be moved.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's just other things that I just shall not be moved.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just because I believe that I've reached a place of self-actualization and where I could look and be able to discern, right, that this doesn't sit right with my spirit, and this does.
Mm-hmm.
And this doesn't sit right with my spirit, but this does. And whoever doesn't agree, it's okay that you don't agree. But I'm going to believe what I believe. And I think that we just have such bigger fish to fry than is God a man or a woman. I know there's a scene that always comes into my head when people bring up this topic. Boys in the Hood
Mm-hmm.
and Regina King is playing. She's like the homegirl with the guys, and they all in the car and they drinking or whatever. And they said something about God, and she said, with the 40s, she said, "Well, how you know God is a man? How you know God is not a woman?"
Right.
But that's always the scene that comes into my head, because even in that, they made that presentation masculine. Right? She didn't say that presentation wasn't presented feminine in her saying, "How do you know God is not a woman?" In a feminine sense, they made it masculine, which still means in order for you to be in charge, you got to be masculine. Why can't feminine energy manage? Why can't feminine energy lead? Like, why?
Well, you know something? Now, in African spiritual traditions, masculine and feminine energy were both worshipped and appreciated,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you look at the symbol, the yin and the yang,
Mm-hmm.
okay, one's black, one's white, right? Opposite, yet equal.
Mm-hmm. Balance.
Balance.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, in masculine and feminine energy. Too much testosterone isn't a good thing. Too much estrogen isn't a good thing. But if you balance it, right? And that's the whole premise of basically today's show, being able to balance man and woman.
Mm-hmm.
There's not supposed to be a barrier between men and women. These barriers are artificial and they're also psychological. And because of that, you find so many folks battling at home, this power struggle. Well, I'm this and I'm that. For me, titles don't mean much at all. And they mean even less at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we are at home, this is just us. This is our sanctuary. Everything else needs to stop at the door,
Mm-hmm.
right? Don't bring, it's like people say, take off your shoes when you come in the house.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to track dirt and filth through your house. The dirt and filth that you pick up in the street psychologically,
Mm-hmm.
leave that at the door.
Mm-hmm.
Don't bring that in here because it only causes tension,
Mm-hmm.
right? We don't need to battle masculine and feminine energy at home. Like you said, as a black woman, you're dealing with systemic racism,
Mm-hmm.
right? Bigotry. And then you come home and it's another battle. And, it's because we're not balancing the masculine and the feminine. When, men might not want to admit and accept it, but every man has a small amount of estrogen. It's there naturally. and women have a small amount of testosterone. It's there naturally. And you know what? Everything stays in balance and homeostasis.
Mm-hmm.
But, because of how we're taught, how we're socialized, everything is viewed through the masculine lens. And when you try to say, well, hey, wait a minute, maybe it's not that way, it's immediately rejected. I guess it's a pride thing. And, I guess another way of looking at it is, back when we had segregation in this country, you had people in some of these southern states that were dirt poor. One man who was Caucasian, had a farm, a mule, and was barely getting by. Across the road, you had a black man with a farm and a mule, just barely getting by. But based on the Caucasian farmer's skin color, I'm better than you.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the skin color alone, not intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any more money than you.
Mm-hmm.
My house isn't any bigger. Just this makes me better. For a man, right, in a relationship with a woman, I'm better because I'm male. I'm better because my genitalia is different than yours. That logic makes no more sense than the white farmer thought he was better than the black farmer. Makes no sense. When the creator fashioned the human form, the idea was not to create tension between the two, but that the two could come together as a unit,
Mm-hmm.
right? And live in harmony. But, we're constantly battling.
Now, here's where I'm going to step in now, because this is always how I look at everything. So we talked about the problems. We talked about we have to talk about what could be done what's the solution?
Mm-hmm.
Because we still have our men saying that they're searching out Latino women, Asian women, Caucasian women. They're searching out every other woman
Mm-hmm.
except African American women, except
Mm-hmm.
Black women. So my thing is that how do we begin to dismantle that whole perception that Black men have about Black women? And let me say, it's important for me to say, in all of my managing and professional endeavors, I'm really one of those women where I'm really comfortable
Mm-hmm.
with my femininity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very comfortable with being the softer side this is what I always say, the softer side of Sears.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that commercial?
Right.
So I'm okay with tapping into the softer side of Sears. That's who I want to be with my man. I want to be the softer vessel. But how do we manage to stay in that position and still have a man that knows it's okay for us to exercise opinions, right? And to still have thoughts.
Well, we only have about a minute left, so I'm going to make this quick. The reality is, if I know who I am, then I know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm aware of who I am and who you are, then I know that, I'm meant for you, you're meant for me, and we can put all this other nonsense aside, right? But the fact is, most of us go through life not knowing who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Our identity is shaped by what we learn in school, what people tell us, right? But we don't know who we are. And if you don't know who we are, if you don't know who you are as a man, you certainly can't know who your woman is.
Mm-hmm.
So once we learn those things, we can come together. We can fix this problem.
I agree. And I think I want to just, in closing, say this to the brothers. You are the measure of your mate. And your mate, your woman, is a reflection of you. And I think when we get that, we'll value her opinion. We'll know she thinks and is a fluid thinker, just like you, unless you're not a fluid thinker,
right?
But your wife or your woman is the measure of your mate and a reflection of yourself. I'm gonna end on that.
That's a good place to end. So we're gonna get out of here, but we're gonna replay this on Tuesday, and we're gonna be back next Saturday. We're gonna have some interesting. What's the topic for next Saturday? It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's mental health in the Black community, and hopefully we apologize to everyone because I know I did my little commercial on Facebook saying we were going to do that today, but our guest, something came up, so we rescheduled. Ron and I improvised, and we came up with something on the fly. We did good. But next week we will pick up exactly where we were supposed to today, which is mental health in the Black community and the stigmas attached.
Yes.
That's where we'll meet you on that one next week.
All right. Y'all have a good weekend. Enjoy.
Have a good weekend. Happy Easter, Resurrection Sunday, all that good stuff. Ron said, no.
Not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
But some of your viewers